VCY America presents Crosstalk, a nationwide call-in program discussing issues that have an effect on our families, our communities, our churches, our nation, and our world. Crosstalk, an opportunity for you to voice your concerns for biblical principles. And now live by satellite and around the world on the internet at vcyamerica.org. Here is today's Crosstalk.
And thank you for joining us today on Crosstalk. Ladies and gentlemen, we alert you to an issue that is impacting communities all across this country. Increasingly, municipalities are being targeted. States are being targeted. Who? By homosexual activists to enact what are being called, quote, equality ordinances. This is impacting communities all across the country in random fashion. However, in the state of Kansas, there is a systematic approach as activists are going community by community, soliciting city councils to enact what are being called these equality ordinances. Well, here to discuss this matter with us today is Robert Noland, the Executive Director of the Kansas Family Policy Council. Robert, thank you for joining us today.
It's good to be with you and your listeners, Jim, and I think we're going to have an interesting discussion as we move forward this hour.
Well, Robert, as you know, there is really an all-out assault that's being waged in Kansas right now in what I call bullying city councils to enact gender non-discrimination laws. When did this battle begin?
This battle actually began in Kansas about 18 months ago, and it started in the city of Manhattan, Kansas. There was a proposal by a different group, a different homosexual activist group than we're encountering today, to add these gender identity and sexual orientation protections to the city code there. And it was a long, drawn-out process in Manhattan. And a group of pastors and a lot of citizens and Christians in particular became active and got interested and learned about the topic. And through a long series of amendments and adjustments and rewrites, the ordinance was ultimately passed in January of 2011, I believe. And there was an effort to file a formal protest petition to put it on the ballot, but in the meantime, they had a city election. They replaced most of their city council, and the new city council repealed the ordinance. At that time, things seemed to calm down a bit until September, when Lawrence, Kansas, where the University of Kansas is located, chose to adopt this ordinance. And we can talk more about how they did it there. But then a few months later, in November, the city of Hutchinson was approached. Then after the first of the year, the city of Salina was approached to add this ordinance. And subsequently, the cities of Wichita and Pittsburg have also been approached to add this ordinance to their city code.
And there's no assurance that this is where it's going to stop?
No, there's no assurance that this is where it's going to stop. I believe it's a very active, it's a well-funded movement, and they are very busy trying to push these things through where they can.
Now, Robert, if I were doing this program today and I told our listeners, well, we're talking about the state of California today, they said, yeah, that sounds right. Or if I said Massachusetts or Vermont, they would say, well, that sounds normal. But we're talking about America's heartland.
Yes, we are. It's interesting that these kinds of changes are beginning to come to Middle America. And I was talking to someone earlier today, and I said, you kind of expect these things maybe to appear on the coast. And certainly, Europe is much further ahead than we are here on enacting these progressive things. But if you kind of look at the blue state, red state analogy, which we all remember from the Bush years, the blue states have moved forward on these things, and we're seeing them encroach upon the red states more and more every day.
What is the stated purpose for these broad changes to city ordinances? I mean, what is motivating these things? What's the catalyst?
Well, the catalyst simply is homosexual activists have become very busy in the state. They believe that these are valid classes which are being discriminated against, which the evidence is relatively thin on those kinds of claims, but they seem to be going into these city councils. And a little bit about the way this is working, it's kind of interesting. In the case of Lawrence, Kansas, which was the one that was passed last September, I believe the city published the ordinance on a Thursday and proceeded to enact it on a Tuesday evening. So the public had very little knowledge of this. And in other cases, we've seen that they will show up at city council meetings. They've obviously been speaking to city staff or city council members prior to their announcement, and they make a formal request to the city council, and the ordinance is maybe not in its final form, but they've already provided a draft of the ordinance to the councils, and they want to push forward for its approval quickly. And we have been successful in delaying that in a number of cases, and just making sure we have time to let people know what's going on.
Folks, I want you to understand that tactic that Robert is talking about here today, because this is so often the case. It's happening all across the country. We're seeing it happen right here in our state of Wisconsin as well, where all of a sudden there is a group that goes into the city council meeting and demanding right at that very meeting that they go ahead and pass either some kind of gender non-discrimination law or domestic partner benefits for the city employees, because they don't want the public to get wind of it. They don't want this to go into public hearings and have there be a battle, but they are going fully armed into these meetings and demanding, and I've used the term bullying, the belittling of council members. You must pass this to stop this discrimination from taking place.
That's large part what's happening here as well. And then when you think about a small town, Hutchinson's not a small town, but you can imagine the city staff is pretty lean these days with budgets and things, and a lot of times there's just no resources to put into the research and the legal research and the statistical research that you need to actually justify these things, or in our position, to justify that they shouldn't be enacted. It's often kind of a blindsided kind of thing once they turn up.
Robert, these bills are often called, well, let's see, before we get to that, let me just ask you this. We've got to establish some definitions here. These use the terms sexual orientation and gender identity. How are these terms defined?
That's an interesting question also, because some of the ordinances have not been written yet, but we're going forward under the general definition of sexual orientation is either heterosexual, homosexual, or bisexual. Those are the three main categories, and I know if you get into a lot of different web pages, you can find 5 or 6 different types of orientations, but those are the three that we're mainly looking at here. Now, gender identity is a rather different kind of thing, and when I began talking to people about this, they just kind of would look at me with these blank stares when you try to explain to them what gender identity means. And what it is, a person who has a gender identity means that they may be born a male or a female, biologically male or female, but at some point in time in their life, they make a decision that they are really a woman in a man's body, so they choose to live as a woman. Or if it's a woman, she could live as a man. That is the term that describes what gender identity means. And the crux of the matter is, people who are in these categories believe they're discriminated against and believe that they need to have protections encoded into city laws to make sure that they have access to certain things that they're looking for.
Well, I'm looking specifically, and I know each community that we'll talk about perhaps has a little variance to this, but I'm looking at Hutchinson, Kansas right now, and from their Human Relations Commission, they give these suggested definitions: sexual orientation, actual or perceived male or female heterosexuality, homosexuality, or bisexuality by inclination, practice, or expression. These are the very things you talked about. And then gender identity, a gender-related identity, appearance, expression, or behavior of a person, regardless of the person's assigned sex at birth. This is very, very bizarre in nature that they're talking about here, but this is in essence new classes of people that they're trying to give special accommodations for, and in so doing, Robert, these bills here are often called bathroom bills. What is meant by bathroom bills?
Well, the term bathroom bill refers to the fact that these ordinances, in almost every single case we've encountered in Kansas, in fact, it is every single case encountered in Kansas, covers something called public accommodation, which is requiring of another definition. Public accommodation is a term that's referred to in discrimination law, meaning any place that is a public gathering place or a business or a church or a public building has facilities, restrooms, boardrooms, any manner of room in that building is a public accommodation entity. And the reason we're calling these bathroom bills is because under the term public accommodation, you would have to allow someone who has a gender identity definition as part of their being, in other words, a man who chooses to live as a woman, could gain and legally demand access to the women's restroom. So we're calling these bathroom bills. It goes for bathrooms and locker rooms.
You know, what you're saying is not just right-wing rhetoric. I'm looking again at the fact sheet, the FAQ sheet for the Human Relations Commission for Hutchinson, Kansas. And I just want to relate a couple questions that they had here. Here's a question. I'm an employer. Would the new rules mean that I have to eliminate gender-segregated restrooms? Here's the answer from the community of Pittsburg. I'm sorry, this is Hutchinson as it relates to this issue. So do I have to eliminate gender-segregated restrooms? Here's the answer. You would not have to eliminate gender-segregated restrooms. You may still maintain gender-segregated restrooms in other facilities, such as dressing rooms or locker rooms. A transgender person must be allowed to use restrooms appropriate to their gender identity rather than their assigned gender at birth without being harassed or questioned. Here's another question. What if other patrons have safety or moral objections to a transgender individual's use of gender-segregated restrooms? The answer? Encourage that individual to wait until the other person has left the restroom. It would be illegal to require a transgender person to use a gender-neutral restroom facility or to require a transgender person to use restroom appropriate to their gender identity only when others are not present. And then let me just share one more. This is, must transgender people also be allowed to use gender-segregated locker and shower facilities? The answer, yes. It is recommended that public accommodation facilities such as locker rooms, which are designated for use based on sex, take steps to create private spaces within them, for example, by installing curtains or cubicles. Individuals who are nonetheless uncomfortable with sharing locker or shower facilities with a transgender person should be accommodated by allowing those individuals to shower or change at a time when they will not be able to use when they will be able to use it in private. Similarly, if a transgender individual requests to use locker or shower facilities in private because of safety or privacy concerns, the individual should be accommodated in that request. Robert, how bizarre are we going to get?
Well, you know, it's a very good question, and you know, you have the implication here that people who have concerns with this are the ones who have to wait because we're making special accommodations for those who are perceiving themselves as a different gender. But you're also talking to business owners and saying, you have to kind of police this. You know, you're the one who has to be in charge of when someone can go in there, when someone can't go in there. If someone has a concern, you have to know what to do. And a business owner, you know, he could make a mistake or just, you know, tell them, here's what we're going to do, and later on they could be sued for discrimination because someone did not like the action that they took in providing access to restrooms or locker room facilities.
Folks, you're listening to Crosstalk here on VCY America. We're speaking today with Robert Noland, the Executive Director of the Kansas Family Policy Council. We're talking about these gender identity laws that are systematically making their way through the state of Kansas right now. We bring it to your attention because Kansas is really in the crosshairs of a systematic approach to this, but this is springing up in communities all across this nation. We're going to look further here right after the break as to not only how this is impacting public accommodations, but what other areas are being impacted by such legislation as well. And then we're also going to share with you where this is leading, and we're going to take a case in point as to something that's going on in the state of California even as we speak. You're listening to Crosstalk on the VCY America Network.
Back to Genesis with Dr. John Morris, scientist and creation author at the Institute for Creation Research. Dr. Morris, what is meant by being created, quote, after their kind, as we see in Genesis chapter 1?
Chris, evidently God created the animals in separate categories. Dogs and cats are different. There's a lot of variety among each, but there's nothing in between. God created each one after that kind. Of course, evolution thinks that all of life came from a common ancestor, that one kind morphed into another kind. A lot of Christians even think that evolution was the mechanism that God used to create. But I think the Bible is quite explicit here. It says 10 times in Genesis chapter 1 that God created the various plants and animals after their kind. They did not evolve one from another. Evolution was not the mechanism that God used to create. He created things after their kind, and He did so back in Genesis.
For more information, visit our website at icr.org. I'm Chris O'Brien. Thanks for tuning in.
These new so-called gender identity laws are making their way systematically through cities, random cities and communities and counties across the nation, but I've not witnessed anything more systematic than what's happening in the state of Kansas right now, as city by city, community by community, homosexual activists are waging their campaign to push their value system or lack thereof upon communities throughout the state of Kansas. We're talking with Robert Noland, the executive director of the Kansas Family Policy Center, and we have seen this. First target was Manhattan, Kansas, then Lawrence, and it's now working through Salina and Wichita and Pittsburg and Hutchinson, Kansas. Robert, as we take a look at these, it goes beyond just public accommodations, but there's others that are impacted by this as well, even those who have perhaps a bed and breakfast?
Absolutely. We've looked at a lot of different precedents which have been set by these laws and these rules across the country, and we're trying to educate people in Kansas that these things are coming. And you could have an example of a bed and breakfast in Illinois. I believe Illinois has some form of a civil union or a same-sex marriage law, and a homosexual couple was wanting to use a bed and breakfast for their wedding ceremony or rehearsal dinner or something like this, and the owner happened to be a Christian, a person of faith, who does not want to encourage or condone or facilitate such things, and declined to avail the services of the bed and breakfast to this couple. As I understand it, they have been targeted by a lawsuit under discrimination laws in Illinois at this time. We have another example just recently of a T-shirt company in Kentucky who was approached by a homosexual group wanting them to produce T-shirts for their gay pride event. And the owner, again, happened to be a Christian who ran his business according to his deeply held beliefs and the fundamental things he believed to be true. And he declined the service, but he did find a competitor who would do it for them at the same price. And in turn, he has also been targeted for action under the discrimination laws that exist in that town. Wow.
So we're talking specifically here that this is going to impact employers. It's going to impact, and even they define hotel as to any entity that perhaps has rooms available to transient guests that they have 4 or more rooms. They're going to be impacted by this. Gymnasiums, swimming pools. I mean, all those public accommodations, businesses. What about churches themselves?
Well, churches are addressed specifically in the information we've been given by the city of Hutchinson and Salina. I know we've got some listeners in Salina today. All this applies there as well. In Hutchinson, they have said that any church that allows public events to happen on its property cannot legally decline, and these are the words that are printed in the Hutchinson document, they cannot decline a gay couple wanting to rent the parish hall for a party. So churches are basically faced with either they have public events and comply with this new law, or they shut all public events out and serve only their members.
Wow.
I don't know too many churches that aren't open to public and aren't seeking public involvement and trying to get people to visit with them. So it's a double-edged sword, and we've had a couple of churches that say they will not comply with this if it's passed, and that sets up a legal challenge, obviously, far, far into the future.
Now, what about an employer who is a for-profit business and may own a hardware store, any kind of retail store, a fast food, whatever it might be, any employer who said, you know what, my religious beliefs disagree with this new ordinance, do they have an exemption?
Not that I'm aware of, written anywhere in the information I've seen. They are targeted by the same laws as everyone else. And you bring up an interesting discussion with employers, because you may have an employee and you may not know their sexual orientation or any of that private stuff, which should be private. However, if you have an employee who is not performing well for one reason or another, in the course of things, has to be fired or let go, and later on you find out this person was in fact homosexual, they could possibly come back and make the case that they were fired because of their sexual orientation. Now, the merits of the case may not prove it out, but still, that employer has to bear the cost of going to court, arguing and proving the legitimate reasons why someone might have been fired.
Wow. Well, Robert, let me just ask you, we were talking specifically about Kansas, but the implications are broad across the nation here. But give us an update, we're going to have to do a brief update, though, of the 4 main targeted communities at this point as to what status things are in. What's happening in Salina?
Okay. In Salina, the City Council is set to vote on this on, I believe, the 14th of May. Family Policy Council has been collecting petition signatures in all of these cities, and we just delivered those yesterday. We had almost 300 people who had signed our petition expressing concerns with this. We hadn't been collecting signatures as long in Salina because it's gone fairly quickly there, but we're looking forward to see what happens. A lot of people in Salina are indicating they want this to come into a ballot referendum at some point in time for the people to vote on publicly.
Folks in Salina, I'm going to give you a phone number where you can be in contact with your city council members as they approach a vote within the next couple of weeks. It is absolutely vital for you to contact your council members to let them know your views on this issue. It's absolutely vital for you to awaken your church as to what's going on and the implications that are there for your church, businesses that are represented through your church as far as the parishioners of your church. The number to the City Council in Salina, 785-309-5700. That's 785-309-5700. Let's see. What about Hutchinson?
Hutchinson is in a very similar position. They are set to vote on this on their City Council on the 15th of May. And likewise, we have been collecting signatures. We've been working on Hutchinson a little longer since it started before the first of the year. And last week we delivered nearly 900 signatures to the City Council from people who have taken the opportunity to sign a piece of paper or go to our webpage and sign our online petition to let the City Council know that they don't favor this. And again, we're just going to wait and see what happens. There's an opportunity at some point in time. This may also go to a ballot referendum. Those decisions haven't been made. But we will wait and see the outcome of what the City Council determines.
Hutchinson, Kansas, folks, you can contact the City Council there at this number, 620-694-2611. 620-694-2611. Let's move to Wichita.
In Wichita, the issue has been fairly quiet lately. We haven't heard a lot. We've been talking to some people at City Hall about the problems we see with this bill, letting them know the concerns we have. Wichita is actually fairly conservative, and the City Council reflects that. I don't know what's going to happen here. We're hoping that it just doesn't come up, that maybe the issue will go away, but we will wait and see what happens here in Wichita.
The Wichita phone number to the City Council in Wichita, 316-268-4331. That's 316-268-4331. And then Pittsburg, Kansas?
Pittsburg is very similar to Wichita. There's not been a lot of action that's happened down there. I understand that they have a Human Relations Commission, which is the panel the City Council often turns to consider these things, but I've been told that commission hasn't met for a number of years, and they're trying to decide what to do in Pittsburg. So again, we're going to wait and see what happens in Pittsburg, but we're going to be ready to go forward just as we have in Salina and Hutchinson on the same issue.
And it would behoove people to be preemptive by contacting their council members, wouldn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. And we do have petitions for all 4 of these cities on our webpage. And we've actually established for Hutchinson and Salina residents a neat thing on the Internet where if they come to our webpage and click on a button, they can provide their address, and they can simply send a pre-formatted message to their city council members expressing their concerns. It takes a matter of a few clicks, and you provide your address, and you send a message to your council members. Okay,
I'll give you, folks, be ready to jot down that website address, but let me quickly give you the Pittsburg phone number to the Pittsburg City Council, or to the head of the City Council, 620-231-4100. 620-231-4100. Now, tell us about your specialized website you have for these issues.
We have a webpage called Awaken Kansas. That's AwakenKansas.com, C-O-M. And we have information for all of these ordinances that are pending on every city that we know about right now. We have links to petitions where people can go and sign on to the petition. We just delivered those to Hutchinson and Salina, but if we have more signatures, we'll send them on. We're still collecting those. Wichita and Pittsburg, the same. We're collecting all the information we can get from people so that we can let their city representatives know their thoughts on this. And as I mentioned, for Hutchinson and Salina, we've created an online message system where they can click a couple times, provide their address, and send a message directly to their city council members expressing their concerns with this ordinance proposal.
Okay, folks, again, the website is awakenkansas.com, awakenkansas.com. But, folk, across the nation, you will benefit by looking at this site as well to see what Kansas Family Policy Council is doing in regard to this matter. And let me ask you about another thing here, Robert. As I was looking at the Kansas Diversity website, they state on their site that there's an attempt on a state level to curb all these individual attacks on the communities, which that put these cities in line with the state's anti-discrimination ordinance, of which gender identity is not a part of the state's anti-discrimination ordinance. HB 2260, its companion Senate Bill 142. We understand that it's already passed the House, waiting passage in the Senate, which is presently adjourned until Wednesday.
Correct.
These are religious liberty bills. What can you tell us about this?
The bills we're talking about right now are simply a state version of a federal bill that was passed in the 1990s called the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. And just as a little bit of history, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act applied to federal government and all the states at one point. However, there was a court case in which the Supreme Court ruled that the federal law could not apply to these states. So the RFRA, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, applies only to the federal government. That meant that each state in turn, if they chose to do so, could adopt their own Religious Liberty Protection Act. And that's what this is in Kansas. It's the Religious Liberty Protection Act, and it provides a legal basis for people so that they cannot be compelled to act against or for their faith in ways that they don't agree with. In other words, your religious liberties are preserved, and that legal framework says that the state must prove a compelling interest before someone can be forced to do something against their conscience.
So would this protect business owners who have religious convictions in this regard, in regard to these bills?
You know, as with many, many laws that we see come through, it ultimately may result in a court case to establish the precedent. But this bill would provide, I believe, the legal framework and the legal basis for instance, a Christian business owner to defend their actions if they're ever accused of discrimination under one of these new ordinances. It simply provides the legal basis for someone to defend themselves in the face of other state laws which are compelling them to act contrary to their conscience.
By the way, in Kansas, regarding this, again, it's HB 2260. It's companion SB 142, religious liberty bills. Those of you in Kansas, you can use the Kansas Legislative Hotline at 800-432-3924, 800-432-3924. And outside of the state of Kansas, the number is 785-296-2149. That's 785-296-2149 in regard to these religious liberty bills. And is that indeed the fact that the House has already passed this?
Yes, I was just going to say the House did pass it just before they finished up the first part of their session a few weeks ago, and it now is laying on the doorstep of the state Senate. And we really do need people to call their senators and ask them to bring this up, because they're only going to be in for a very short time once they go back into session this week. They're kind of doing what they call their wrap-up session. And there are certain things demanding attention, and this may or may not be one of them, but if enough people call and encourage them, we may get this to the floor of the Senate.
We'll repeat those phone numbers after the break, and then also tell you about what's taking place in California at this very same time on a similar topic. We'll be right back.
Is America on a collision course with God? In the book, As America Has Done to Israel, author John McTernan indicates there is a direct correlation between the alarming number of massive disasters striking America and our leaders pressuring Israel to surrender her land for peace. Costing hundreds of lives and causing hundreds of billions of dollars worth of damage, dozens of disasters, including devastating earthquakes, raging fires, hurricanes, floods, and tornadoes, have hit America, and always within just a short time after putting pressure on Israel. The book not only points out the correlation to these events, but also gives guidance as to what you can do as an individual, and what America can do to change the direction of our country in relation to Israel. Copies of the book As America Has Done to Israel are available for a donation of $17 or more to VCY America and can be obtained by calling 1-800-729-9829. That's 1-800-729-9829.
Our guest today is Robert Noland, Executive Director of the Kansas Family Policy Council, as we're talking about these gender identity laws that are making their way community by community through the state of Kansas as far as targeting this state in many different areas, the heartland of America. And we are seeing these crop up in states all across the nation. By the way, Eau Claire, Wisconsin, if you're in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, at 4 o'clock this afternoon, your city council members are coming together to decide about offering new domestic partner benefits for City of Eau Claire, Wisconsin employees. But right now in Kansas, there is a pair of bills, companion bills, that has already passed the House, now before the Senate, Senate Bill 142, that are religious liberty bills. And you may contact the Kansas Legislative Hotline at 1-800-432-3924. This is for Kansas residents, 1-800-432-3924. Outside the state of Kansas, you may call 785-296-2149. That's 785-296-2149. And Robert, if you were calling that hotline right now, what message would you be conveying?
I would be calling to leave a message for my state senator to say that there's an important bill pending for your action. It regards my religious liberties. I want you to make sure you have it come to the floor, and when it comes to the floor, I want you to support it. That's the message I would be sending to senators today.
And again, that is Senate Bill 142.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Well, I'm going to digress, but not digress. As I was preparing for this interview today, all of a sudden the fax machine turned on, and lo and behold, we received a fax from Senator Ted Lieu from the state of California. And the headline caught my attention. Senator Ted Lieu's bill would be the first in the nation to regulate conversion therapy. Folks, I want you to listen to this, because this is where we are headed as a nation. Senate panel cracks down on deceptive sexual orientation conversion therapies. A key professions review panel late yesterday, approved a patient protection bill plan by Senator Ted Lieu that promises to help raise public awareness of bogus and unethical therapies by mental health providers who promise to help change a person's sexual orientation. Under the guise of a California license, some therapists are taking advantage of vulnerable people by pushing dangerous sexual orientation change efforts, Lieu said. These bogus efforts have led, in some cases, to patients later committing suicide, as well as severe mental and physical anguish. This is junk science, and it must stop. As I quote further from this press release, Senate Bill 1172, again this is California, would ban children under 18 from undergoing so-called sexual orientation change efforts and would require adults seeking such treatment to sign informed consent forms indicating they understand the potential dangers, including depression and suicide, of reparative therapy, and that it has no medical basis. Being lesbian or gay is not a disease or mental disorder for the same reason that being a heterosexual is not a disease or mental disorder, Lieu said. The medical community is unanimous in stating that homosexuality is not a medical condition. Citing nearly 40 years of research by mental health experts, SB 1172 is based on the following. An individual's sexual orientation, whether homosexual, bisexual, or heterosexual, is not a disease, disorder, illness, deficiency, or shortcoming. Sexual orientation change efforts pose critical health risk to lesbian, gay, and bisexual people, including confusion, depression, guilt, helplessness, hopelessness, shame, social withdrawal, suicide, substance abuse, stress, self-blame, decreased self-esteem, and a host of anger, dysfunction, and dehumanized feelings. There is insufficient evidence that any type of psychotherapy can change a person's sexual orientation. Instead, sexual orientation therapy in some cases has caused serious and lasting harm. Clearly, so-called conversion or reparative therapy is scientifically inefficient or ineffective and has resulted in much harm, Lieu said. Simply put, this is an unacceptable therapeutic practice. SB 1172 now faces review by the Senate Judiciary Committee. No hearing date has been set yet, but most likely will be on May the 8th. Your response to this, Robert?
It's very interesting that we're beginning to put these kinds of laws into place regarding what kind of treatment someone may or may not receive. And my first thought was there are probably a lot of Christian counselors who can point to examples where things have been able to change for people. I know there are several national groups which talk about this and lecture on this and provide counseling and help all across the country. And I believe that there are some people who find themselves in this lifestyle for one reason or another and do wish to change, and they need to be able to seek that help when they need it.
Well, I also think of Scripture that talks about the passage that talks about the sins of the flesh, and it says, and such were some of you. And we also see many times a list of sins, and then we see the words, but God.
That's right.
And certainly there is hope, there is change, and to negate that certainly flies in the face of those who have come out of the practice of this lifestyle, like so many have done, and have found hope and healing and forgiveness in Jesus Christ. And this would negate, though, if I read this correctly, a pastor would not be able to counsel a child under 18 how to leave the homosexual lifestyle. It would be against the law.
Yeah. If you have a child who's confused, doesn't understand what they're feeling, and wants to seek help or is just needing some guidance, I believe you've probably precluded any of that kind of information from reaching that child, regardless of the situation that led to it or how they found themselves where they are. You're taking what hope may exist for somebody in that situation who wants to leave that situation. You're taking that hope away.
This is Senate Bill 1172, Senate Bill 1172 in California, and I just want to take a moment to give some phone numbers because this committee is going to be meeting in the near future on this legislation. This Judiciary Committee, you can reach them at this number, and I would encourage people all across the nation to contact this committee at this number, 916-651-4113, 916-651-4113. And California listeners, you in particular, need to be in contact with them. Also, I want to quickly give you the numbers for the people that sit on this Judiciary Committee in California because of the grave significance that this legislation has. The chair, every one of these begins with area code 916, so I'm not going to repeat that, 916, and then they all start with the prefix 651. So if you write 916-651, I'll give you the last four digits for each number, for each name. We have Senator Noreen Evans. Senator Noreen Evans, 4002. Senator Tom Harmon, 4035. That's 4035. Senator Sam Blakesley, 4015. 4015. Senator Ellen Corbett, 4010, and Senator Mark Leno at 4003. That's 4003. Well, I'd like to open our phone lines today here on Crosstalk to get your reaction to these matters here today, specifically the gender identity laws that have targeted the state of Kansas right now. Our telephone number 800-733-9829. That's 800-733-9829. What is your reaction to what has hit Manhattan, Kansas, Lawrence, Kansas, Salina, Hutchinson, Wichita, Pittsburg? We'd like you to pick up your phones, give us a call here today, speak with Robert Noland. But Robert, I'd like you to, again, give us your website because there's a lot of helpful information there where our listeners can obtain information about these Kansas issues. Certainly.
Our webpage is www.awakenkansas.com. We have online petitions. We have mechanisms created where you can contact city council members and even state senators regarding this religious liberties bill. You can find that all on our Awaken Kansas webpage. We give people every opportunity they can to reach out and contact their elected officials. We make it as easy as possible, and I hope people take the opportunity to use those resources that we put at their fingertips.
What would you say to the individual who says, I'm glad I don't live in the state of Kansas. I don't need to be concerned about this?
I think that they do need to be concerned about this because these things, it appears to me that the goal of the movement that's pushing for these things, every time they get another city they can go to the state lawmakers and say, 30% of the state already lives under these rules, so let's pass a statewide ordinance.
Yeah.
Or, another city goes, well, now it's 35%. And then nationally they can say, 40% of the country already has these rules, so Congress, you need to pass these. So it's a movement that's out there. It's an incremental, methodical, step-by-step movement, which is trying to get more and more people under their rules so that they can go further and further and get these passed at the federal level, which they have failed to do since the 90s. There was a bill in Congress in the 90s which would have done this nationally. However, even under the Clinton administration, they could not get any movement on it.
Well, I can sure bear witness of what you're saying, because we are witnessing it here in our state as it relates to the domestic partner benefits aspect. And once one community passes it, then another community says, see, they did it, we need to do it too. And so they pass it. And then the next community say, well, see, they did it here, they did it here, they did it here, and now we need to do it too.
Yeah, and the other implication to these rules, these new laws and ordinances, is this. In every state that has ever gone on to change the definition of marriage, either through the courts or through the legislature, they have relied on the presence of these kinds of ordinances inside their state borders to do so. If you have 10 cities with these rules, it makes it much easier to go to the legislature or to go to court and base your legal argument off of the presence of these ordinances that already exist.
AwakenKansas.com is the website. Let's go to the phone lines. Our number here, by the way, 800-733-9829. I'd especially like to hear from Kansans, but all across the nation as well, 800-733-9829. Let's begin in Fort Scott, Kansas. Tom, you're on the air.
Yes, how are you folks today?
Fine,
Doing well, thank you.
Good. I was just thinking about what you guys said, that, they're trying it in Salina and Hutchinson and Wichita and Pittsburg. I'm trying to think that they're trying to fill out and see where they can get it started and go from there in that part of the state.
Well, actually, it's all over the state. I mean, we're seeing quite a cross section of the state, from from the central part of the state to. I know there's even been some moves up in the Kansas City area as well, hasn't there, Robert?
I don't know what's happened up there. If it did, it was some years ago. But the only city that I know of that has the ordinance right now is Lawrence, Kansas.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing we've noticed, and this may be just a coincidence or it may be part of how they're moving through the state, they're picking towns, with the exception of Salina, where we have colleges or community colleges. And I think they're trying to capitalize on the student population of those entities to help try to get this thing moving, because every other town either has a major university or a community college located in its borders.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate your call.
Yeah, you're welcome.
To Port Huron, Michigan, Harry, you're on the air.
Yeah, hey guys, thank you so much for this. And as far as people being outside the state of Kansas, you better be concerned, because if it comes to our cities, if it comes to our cities, we better be ready to act. And also, I think people, if these bills don't pass, if we don't get our way on these things, what we need to happen for people of conscience, not just even Christians, but just people of conscience, those people that are Christian business owners or landlords or any kind of Christian or any kind of business, I should say, they better have the number for the Alliance Defense Fund handy, I would think.
Thank you, Harry. Appreciate your call. Are there groups that have stepped up to assist citizens in that regard that you know of, Robert?
Yes, in fact, and Harry's absolutely correct. Alliance Defense Fund is a wonderful asset to people of conscience in this country. We mentioned a Kentucky T-shirt company a little bit earlier who's being targeted because they wouldn't produce T-shirts for a gay pride event. Alliance Defense Fund has stepped in to help there. They help in many different ways, and they're a wonderful asset, and they will be available, I think, when these things start to happen.
You're listening to Crosstalk on VCY America. A quick 60-second break, and we'll be right back.
For the Worldview Weekend Minute, I'm Brandon House. Our website's worldviewweekend.com, continuing on our list of 20 characteristics of false teachers embraced by the false church. Number 5, false teachers are arrogant and self-righteous. That's one of the characteristics. We see that right in 2 Timothy 3, 2 through 5. It says this, "But know this, that in the last days perilous times will come, for men will be lovers of themselves. Well, that's the highest form of arrogance, is it not? Lovers of money, boasters, well, that's arrogance. Proud, that's arrogance. Blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, unloving, unforgiving, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, despisers of good, traitors, headstrong, haughty, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. And look at this. This is where they are self-righteous, having a form of godliness, but denying its power. And from such people turn away. So 5 in our list of 20 signs or characteristics of false teachers. False teachers are arrogant and self-righteous. Our website's worldviewweekend.com.
Robert Noland is with us. He's Executive Director of the Kansas Family Policy Council. And folks, check out that site, awakenkansas.com. awakenkansas.com. Back to the phone lines, we have Angie calling from Pittsburg, Kansas. Angie, you're on the air.
Hi, I want to thank your guest for bringing up all the information that he has. Down here, our area, at least our town anyway, is very liberal. We have the university, and our governing body overall, for the town overall, it seems to be quite liberal. And none of the information that's been brought out hasn't been in our local papers, hasn't been brought up in any way, shape, or form. But then again, a lot of what the liberal things that go on in our town don't show up until after it's already been done.
Mm-hmm. I would encourage you, Angie, if you have access, to get on Awaken Kansas, the website there, and you'll be able to download information and really keep abreast as to what's taking place, in each community, including right there where you live.
And there's not been a lot happen in Pittsburg yet, but we're waiting to see what happens, and we'll be there ready to go with all the information we've been using in Hutchinson and Salina when the time comes.
Thank you, Angie. Let's go next, and she's right. So often we wake up and all of a sudden the newspaper comes and says, by the way, last night this city council did such and so, and certainly the Kansas Family Policy Council is seeking to be proactive to let people know in advance what's coming their way.
Exactly.
To Jamie calling from Milwaukee, you're on the air.
Hi, Jim. Great topic, by the way. Also, by the way, for you, Jim, City of Milwaukee has an anti-discrimination law already, so you might want to, rustle up the posse or the whatever. The original the guy who wrote the original reparative therapy or sexual conversion report back in 2001, he just refuted it. He just repudiated it. So, that whole business of, was it California Senate bill?
Yeah.
Very peculiar timing. I mean, this was a few days ago. Anyway, the bathroom bills, I have no idea what the solution is. If you just say, to heck with you people, do what the anatomy says, or if there's unisex for every... I'd love to hear what solution you've got. I have no idea.
Thank you, Jamie, for your call. What I understand here, Robert, is that businesses cannot just have a gender-neutral bathroom and say, well, just go use this. They have to actually make accommodations. If somebody who is biologically a male but says, I feel like a female today, you must allow them to go in and use a female restroom.
Yeah, that is what is written into these laws. And I think the implication is not how we handle this. The implication is that we're placing the legal burden on people who are unrelated to the issue to make the accommodations and to bear the cost of the defense should someone become offended. That's part of the real implication here. There may be another solution which we haven't explored yet, but this is not the right solution as far as the legal framework that's being set up.
Let's go to Carl Junction, Missouri. And Tim, you're on the air.
Good afternoon. Say, my question is on this allowing these transgender sexual people to use the opposite sex's restroom. A man dressing as a woman now could have the right to use the woman's restroom. What's going to prevent somebody from being somebody looking for a thrill, to be a pedophile of sort? Now, how are you going to prevent that? Some guy dressing up as a woman going in, let's see these girls. That's horrible. I can't imagine them allowing that to happen.
Your thoughts on that, Robert?
it's a very valid concern. And while we recognize that a lot of people, most people, in fact, nearly every person who is in the alternative lifestyle category is not necessarily a pedophile or a sexual predator, we have to examine the fact that passage of these bills could open the door to make it easier for pedophiles to do the things that they do. That's one other concern which needs to be addressed as we talk about this issue. We're not saying that people in the alternative lifestyle community are doing this regularly by any means, but there are people who would seize upon this opportunity, if they are predators, I think, to try and utilize this as a door.
Thank you for the call. And that really begs the question, what about the children? What about the children? These children that will go in to utilize the changing rooms at the swimming pools, because swimming pools are listed in some of these as far as having to accommodate, and they're going to encounter situations like this. What about the children?
Yeah, it's a good question that remains unanswered, but it's one of the concerns that desperately needs to be addressed when you talk about public accommodation, restrooms, locker rooms, changing rooms, and swimming pools.
Wow. Well, Robert, we're down to just about 90 seconds here. I want to turn the mic over to you to share what's on your heart, to kind of bring to conclusion the issues we've talked about here today.
Sure, and I appreciate being with you and your listeners today. I just emphasize that the most important thing people can do is contact their elected officials to let them know their concerns about this. It could be as simple as calling your elected official and saying, I don't want you to pass this. You can add more substantial information if you want to, but registering your opinion is one of the most important things that you can do. And get your church involved. Talk to people at church, talk to your pastor, let them know these things are happening. Pastors are very busy. They may not have time to attend to all these details. Someone in the church needs to make sure the pastor is aware of what's happening, because these are at the core of religious liberty's values, and we need to be able to address them and defend them at every chance.
This is going to impact churches. It's going to impact Christian businesses, business owners. It's going to impact hotels, any entity that has public accommodations. It's going to impact schools throughout the communities. And folks, you need to be informed. And if you would, again, Robert, share the website address where listeners can stay informed on this very issue.
Yes. The webpage we've established dealing with this issue in Kansas is called awakenkansas.com. That's www.awakenkansas.com. We update it regularly, and all the information and everything we've done is on there, including our testimony, our petitions, and ways for you to contact your lawmakers.
Well, folks, these issues are not peculiar just to the state of Kansas. About a year ago here on Crosstalk, it was last July, we talked about the Denny's restaurants in Maine that had agreed to allow customers to choose restrooms based on their gender identity.
Absolutely. That's one of the examples we cite quite often.
Wow. Well, Robert, we appreciate you being with us here today. And listeners, we encourage you to visit awakenkansas.com. We give several other numbers on the program today. Within a couple hours, these will be posted on our Crosstalk website as well for you to jot down. But, Robert, thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much. I appreciate being with you today.
And, folks, thanks for joining us today here on Crosstalk on the VCY American Network. And, Robert, hang on the line. We'll talk with you here right after the theme. But, folks, stay informed on these vital issues and get involved. And, by all means, be in prayer. Thanks for joining us today on Crosstalk.
You've been listening to Crosstalk via satellite and the internet from VCY America. Views expressed may or may not be those of this station. For a CD of today's program, send a donation of $6 or more to VCY Tape Ministry, 3434 West Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 53208. Or download by RSS or podcast from crosstalkamerica.com. And join us again for Crosstalk.